Hello. Uh, Good morning and good afternoon, or for everyone, because we are in different time zones. My name is Basil. I am the president of Council of Asian Science Editors, and I would like to welcome you to our first webinar on the topic of peer review for open science. Uh, Before we begin the webinar and I introduce our various presentations, I would like to just do some housekeeping announcements. This will be a biannual webinar, and its schedule is once in October, once in April. The topics selected for this webinar will be based on recommendations from participants, and the objective of these webinars is to help spread good publication practices across all Asian journals and all our member participants. With this, I will start with the introductions. The first webinar will be on challenges in peer review, and the presenter is Mr. So. He is a senior research fellow at Korea Institute of Science, Technology and Information. He is also an editor for the Journal of Information Science and Theory, which is published by KISTI, and is the General Secretary of Council of Asian Science Editors. So with that, I will hand it over to Professor So, who will talk about the next topic, that is challenges in peer review. Over to you, Mr. Professor So.
Thank you for introducing me well. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, clear.
Clear.
I am Tae-Sul, as introduced. The topic of my talk today is challenges in peer review. As you know, peer review is one of the most essential process in scholarly journal publishing. However, there are many problems to be solved. For example, there are editorial favoritism, black box system of peer review, delay and unfaithfulness of reviewers, etc. Various attempts have been made recently to improve the peer review process while open science is focused in scholarly societies. In my talk, I would like to summarize the challenges of peer review and introduce examples of innovative peer review systems. Excuse me. This is the agenda I will go over today. Firstly, I will define the functions of peer review in scholarly publishing. Then I will raise some issues in the peer review according to some studies. After that, I'll brief you on the historical overview of the peer review. Finally, I will introduce my many trials to improve or innovate the peer review for open science. Then conclusion. According to Russ-Hello, the main functions of peer review are summarized like this. Firstly, it is technical evaluation of the validity or soundness of a work in its methodology, analysis, and argumentation. In other words, it is answering the question, is it good scholarship? Secondly, it is assisting editorial selection by assessing the novelty or expected impact of a work. It is answering these questions. Is it exciting, innovative, or important scholarship? And is it right for this journal? conference or funding call. Meanwhile, Severin et al. Break down peer review into 8 purposes. The first one is to assess the contributions of an article. The second one is to conduct quality control by filtering out articles that do not meet the quality standard of a journal. The third one is to improve articles. Reviewers are expected to give authors detailed instructions on improving an article. The fourth one is to assess the suitability of article for a journal. The fifth one is to provide the decision-making tool for editors. Editors accept or reject articles for publication based on the result of peer review. The sixth one is to receive feedback from peers. It is similar to the third one, but in this case, authors want to receive a critical appraisal from other scholars. The seventh one is to curate a community. Reviewing was perceived as a service to the scholarly community and meant contributing to a greater good defined as a general scientific endeavor. The eighth one is to provide a seal of accreditation for published article. Peer review awards accreditation to published content because peer review is understood as a vetting process by which papers are scrutinized against the publishing criteria of a journal. You may refer to the article for the details. Now, let me go over the programs of traditional peer review. Ross-Hello categorized the programs of traditional peer review into 6 in the same article. Firstly, on reliability and inconsistency. This means that decisions on rejection or acceptance are inconsistent. Secondly, delay and expenses. It shows down the availability of results for further research because the same manuscript may be peer-reviewed many times over as it is successively rejected and resubmitted. Thirdly, on accountability and risk of subversion. These are related to conflict of interest. Editors can reject submissions by selecting reviewers based on their known preference. Reviewers may act unethically in their interest. The next is social and publication biases. Reviewers may be subject to social biases such as gender, nationality, institutional affiliation, language, and discipline. The next is lack of incentive. Peer review provides little incentive for reviewers, as you know. Finally, wastefulness. Information such as behind-the-scene discussions of reviewers and authors is wasted. You may also refer to the article for the detail. Meanwhile, as a co-author of an article, I summarized the cause and problems of peer review along with the measures and solutions for those in a diagram like this. I categorized the major causes of problems of peer review into 4 parts. First is interest and bias of reviewers. Second one is black box characteristics of peer review. Third one is lack of reviewers. finally, low motivation. The four courses introduces three kinds of problems, such as unfair bias review, information waste, and delayed and poor review. To solve the problem, the 6 measures and the solution may be recommended. But I skipped the explanation in detail this time. You may refer to the article. In this seminar, I will focus on innovative peer review method using the transparency of peer review. Because of the time limitation, and also I think it is the most important aspect of peer review innovation. Now I'll talk about the evolution of peer review and also trials to improve peer review. Firstly, let me tell you a brief history of peer review. There was no peer review when the scholarly journal was invented in United Kingdom in 1665. Modern peer reviews, including single and double-blinded, were introduced in 19th centuries. Nature generally adopted peer review in 1973 and Lancet in 1976. This means that peer review is not a complete process in scholarly journal publishing. Peer review is evolving to be more complete. With the beginning of the 21st century, new types of peer review have been tried. Firstly, BMJ opened the reviewer identity and reviewer report in 2007. After that, various peer reviews come into the market. Woods et al. Grouped all the new approaches to peer review into 4 groups like this. The key feature of the first group is whether review identities and review reports are open or not. This group includes traditional blind peer review as well as open peer review. The second group is related to the timing of peer review or commenting. The third group includes 3 subcategories. The first is collaboration, which focuses on whether interaction among reviewers and editors is. The second is cascading or transferring peer review, in which an article already peer reviewed is allowed to be considered by other journals. The third is decoupling, in which the peer review is not directly linked to a particular journal's decision-making process concerning the article. The last group includes types of peer review that cannot be included in the above 3 groups. Meanwhile, Waltman et al. Also grouped all the new approaches into 4 schools from different point of view. The quality and reproducibility school focuses on improving research quality and reproducibility. In this school, data software peer review performed in a data journal has become more important than before. The democracy and transparency school focuses on making peer review more democratic and transparent. In this school, post-publication peer review, such as F1000 research, have been extended recently with open research. The efficiency and incentive school focus on improving the efficiency of peer review and incentives for reviewers. In this school, journal independent peer review, such as Review Commons, has also become more important than before. Finally, the Equality and Inclusion School focus on making peer review more equitable and inclusive. Recently, many journals have adopted the DE&I policy, namely diversity, equity, and inclusive. Therefore, this school has an impact on all other schools. From now on, I will focus on the innovative peer review related to open science. Fairness is the most effective policy among open access and open science communities. Last year, Fairness released a statement on peer-reviewed publication as shown on the screen. It states that scientific publication from research funded by public grants must be published in compliant open access journal or platforms. The important thing is that a platform is also included in the proper publishing place. That means preprints and data repositories can be allowed to be a publishing place of research funded by public grant if they perform peer review. This diagram shows the research life cycle with outputs produced in the research process. Researchers employed by a research institute perform research project funded by funders. The research results are usually published in the form of articles in journals. However, there are various outputs different from journal articles. Data, code, protocols, preprints, review report, and even final report. However, procedural products other than journal article have not been published in the past. In the open science era, many funders require researchers to publish other outputs such as data, preprint, etc. Today, I will introduce the peer reviews for preprint and data paper only. First of all, I go over the preprint review. This graph shows the trends of preprints reviewed per month on SciOT. SciOT was created by eLife. It helps researchers focus their attention on preprints that have been reviewed by groups that they trust. Like this, number of preprints reviewed is continuously increasing. The typical preprint reviews are F1000 research and review commons. F1000 research adopts open post-publication peer review, while review commons journal independent peer review. Open post-publication peer review is adopted by several funders such as Wellcome Trust and Open Research Europe, while review commons launched by AsaBio and Envo Press. This shows the process of open post-publication peer review of F1000 research. This process will also be covered in the next two presentations, so I will briefly explain it. The process consists of 4 steps. In the first step, a basic check is performed. In the second step, an article with its data is published within a week. In the third step, referees are selected and invited. Their reports and names are published alongside the article with the author's response and comments from registered users. Finally, author could publish a revised version. All versions of an article are linked and independently citable. Articles that pass peer reviews are indexed in external databases. This diagram shows the process of the journal independent peer review of review commons. Here I will only explain the main feature of this process. After peer review is finished, Review Commons provides authors with a refereed preference, which includes the author's manuscript, reports from a single round of peer review, and the author's response. And Review Commons transfer refereed preference on behalf of authors to bioRxiv and affiliated journals. Now, let me tell you about data paper peer review. This table summarizes the difference between journal article and the data paper. The aims of peer review of a data paper are very different from that of journal article as shown in the table. A review of data paper checks the completeness and collection method of the data set, while review of a journal article checks the quality, novelty, and the validity of theories, experiments, and observation in the article. This shows the guidelines for data paper peer review of the geoscience journal, data journal. The review are divided in three parts: data description document, metadata, and the data themselves. Let me conclude my talk today. Peer review is scholarly publishing, has many problems to be resolved. First of all, publication ethics should be aware and kept by authors, reviewers, editors, and other stakeholders in the scholarly publishing industry. At the same time, the current peer review process should be changed to be more objective and efficient. Open, transparent peer review, preprint review, and data paper peer review are considered the most desirable peer review approach in the open science era. A call to action for journals: please implement a written policy encouraging preprints and data paper, as well as preprint reviews and data paper reviews. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor So. It was a great presentation. For anyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it down in the chat. We will address them towards the end of the webinar. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Yoon from Seoul National University. He will be talking about ethical guidelines for peer review. He is the current Vice President of Korean Council of Science Editors and also serves as the Editor-in-Chief of Animal Bioscience and is also an editor at various journals. With this, I would like to hand the stage over to him, and we start with the next presentation.
Hi, I'm Cheol-Heui, Vice
Okay,
President
thank you very
at
much.
Korea Council of Science Editors and Professor at Seoul National University. Today I'm going to talk about ethical guidelines for peer review. This is the content, but I'll go through very briefly though. First, I would like to think that why we publish, because of the job promotion and honor and incentive as you publish your article, and sometimes there is research misconduct. This research misconduct is not directly linked to the open access, but because of the open access, we have had a problem, and I think it will continue to have some problem with predatory act and publisher and paper mills. Oftentimes what we see is that those are coined with APC, article processing charge, and authorship issues and impact factor issues as well. So if we see some issues with this publication ethics, and For example, Frontiers retracted nearly 40 papers linked to authorship for sale. And also IOP, Institute of Physics, retract 350 papers at once because of this systemic manipulation of the publication process and considerable citation manipulation. And also with IJEEE, journal retract 122 papers at once. And the first three titles suggest that they were far out of scope. It's supposed to be engineering journal and discuss about COVID-19 and some of this growth and economic integration and development, and therefore was out of scope. What they found with this was some paper mill action and also the collusion during the review process, and also inappropriate subject matter. And a while ago, there was a paper published and discussed whether that the NDPI is a predictive publisher. In here, Paulo extensively analyzed the articles and journals on the MDPI, especially the special issues. So for example, if you see the sustainability in March 2021 had 3,300 open special issues if you compare to only 24 normal issues. And those are 9 special issues per day just for sustainability. If you look at the 32 MDPI journals, they have more than 1 open special issues in 2021 per day, including Saturdays and Sundays. So that's quite high. And how we look at the open access is the debate all the time, and it is one of the business models. So there's a subscription model and open access, and what we should see this open access is it's not about ethics and morality. There could be a problem with the open access, and also there could be a problem with subscription journal model as well. It is a business model in scholarly publication. Of course, there is a pros and cons of open access that I will not go through much of details. And there's a notion suggesting that open access is not enough yet. We need open equity. Well, it has been suggested a long time ago with the open science concept that we need the equity, but probably it's not enough. And also, if you look at the Guardian, shows that the Elsevier was the target at this particular case. It's too greedy, and therefore there's one of the journals on the Elsevier, there's a neuroimaging. 40 leading scientists have resigned because Elsevier refused to reduce the publication charges, while when they see this and they think that there's a huge profit margin over 30,000 US dollars for research paper to be published. That would be even more than Google and Amazon. So early this year, many people actually surprised to see that Clarivate announced the delist of journals, meaning that they will lose the impact factor. Actually, they lost the impact factor already, and a couple of journals from MDPI with the SCI but also 19 Hyundai journals still listed as well. So thinking of those issues that I have mentioned in the previous few slides, and obviously there is an importance of the policy before we talk about action of any of these publication act. There's an article by COPE and DOAJ and OASPAR and WAME. It's a principles of transparency and best practice in scholarly publishing. In that, there's a full different section with 16 categories, and one of them is peer review policy has to be clear. So if you look at those peer review, and following should be clearly stated on the website: whether or not the content is peer reviewed, and whether conduct the peer review, and type of peer review process, and also any policies related to peer review procedures, and how decision about manuscript is made, and any exceptions of the user policy, and that has to be mentioned on the website. And this is quite important to understand. And if you see, the +1 ones retract more than 100 papers for manipulated peer review. Okay, so there was a concerns about improper authorship and conflict of interest that compromised peer review. So not only the journals and publishers, but also each of the peer review should understand this policy as well. And also, if anyone is needed, then there is a systemic manipulation of the publication process by COPE, and they provide flowchart for that. And another one in here, Elsevier retracting 500 papers for peer review. The problem was the peer review process was faked, and some conferences may have never taken place, even virtually, since this was like during the pandemic, and most of those events should have taken virtually. An article has been withdrawn, and they found at least 1,500 off-topic papers. So what this said to us is that not only have a policy or setting the policy by publishers and journals, and we should understand the policy, and we should, more importantly, we should follow the policy, right? So I think I would like to emphasize that part. It's not only just the setting. And review process in principle, I think that these will go through much of details with this kind, so I'll go very fast with a couple of slides. So this is traditionally what we do with a subscription model and go through the peer review. But preprint, there's a without peer review. But at the same time, if they wish, then they can submit to the journal. In fact, many journals these days, they require and ask authors to go for preprint before at the same time as they submit their manuscript. And peer review is evaluation of scientific, academic, or professional work by others working in the same field. Then why we peer review? To ensure the only high quality research is published, but also to improve the quality of the manuscripts. In fact, it's quite important part of publication process. Only problem is that we don't have many peer reviewers, while there's a huge increase of manuscripts submitted and then published at the end of the day. This is models of peer review and different categories, and any journals, if you involved, then you should have one of these three parts, and which I just described is pre-publication and post-publication with compared to preprint. And in the next slide, I'll explain briefly as well. And what that means is that reviewers should understand our responsibilities for confidentiality of the process, but also ownership of the review product. Not many people would familiar with this, but this becomes an issue now. And I'm sure Aris will go through very much of details about this open post publication, especially when we think about the transparency. So article procession, article submission, and publication and data deposition. There's some rejection though. And open peer review and their names and affiliation and report of the referees will be published together with authors' responses and comments. An article revision and all versions will be linked. At the end of the day, they will appear on the PubMed, Scopus, and Google Scholar. And that 1,000 research has been official journal Horizon 2020. Now it is at the stage of forming the Horizon 2025 by European Commission. And recently also it was interesting to see on the blog saying that Open Research Europe authors are encouraged to publish revisions of their article. All versions of an article are linked and independently citable. So I think that this movement would have some impact on peer reviewers' recognition, for instance. Another journal that I used to follow in terms of the open science and transparency of the journal is eLife. So what they do is that for the transparency, eLife includes the editorial decision letter, peer reviews, and accompanying author responses in each and every journal that published with eLife. Furthermore, recently they say that journal eLife ends, accept or reject a role for peer reviewers, and they will publish every paper it reviews as a reviewed preprint. So if you go to the homepage of this eLife, and now they're saying that reviewed preprint, okay, and the public reviews will be posted to a preprint server. So I was curious and I look up the eLife's peer review process on the homepage, and submission part, peer review, and then reviewed preprint, and update peer reviews and assessment, and they will have all versions will be linked, and the record will be linked. And if the authors wish it, then they can go for another journal. So that's something that we should watch how to change it. Ethical guidelines for peer reviews. We should have professional responsibility. Editors should find the reviews match with their scope of content, and potential reviewers therefore should provide their professional information. And we should declare all competing and conflicting interests. For example, recent mentors and mentees, collaborators, and joint grant holders within past 3 years. And once you agree, then you should keep the time frame. And if you cannot, then you can or you could suggest alternative reviewers. Conducting a review, initial step, you should read the manuscript thoroughly and ask anything is not clear, and you should not contact authors directly. And then confidentiality issues. Refrain information obtained during the review process, and do not involve anyone else in the review of the manuscript. That's without permission. So at certain cases with permission, you could do it. And you should name all those people who helped, and that should be included. You should be unbiased and notify the journal if there is anything that's relevant to certain aspect of the manuscript. Conducting a review, any irregularities with respect to research and publication ethics should be contact editor. And transferability of peer review. And if the journals and publishers, they have a policy to transfer the peer review, then they will do it. And therefore, what is possible is that you may review the one article and then you, from the certain journal, and then you should have similar or the same, seemingly same, the manuscript from other journal, and you should not automatically think that that's the same manuscript, or at least content-wise. The name of the authors and content seemingly the same, but could be upgraded. And if there is a chance and requires, and with the permission, then probably you could provide original review as well. Preparing a report and follow the journal's instruction and provide feedback to improve their manuscript. You should do a professional way, and appropriate feedback is quite important as well. Fair, honest, unbiased assessment of the strengths and weakness should be provided. And language and styles, it is about the science, more or less. You should not request the style of the language that you like. Okay, so it's not about the language issues. Minimize that part. And suggestion for the work would be a good idea, and not extend to beyond the scope of the manuscript and aims of the scope of the journal. Accountability is your responsibility, and refrain unfair negative comment and unjustified criticism, and do not intentionally prolong the process of the review. And you should accommodate a request after the peer review that certain revisions and resubmission of that particular paper that you have reviewed before, and respond promptly, and also continue to respect the confidential nature of the review process. So what suggests is that for peer reviewers, ensuring the integrity and conduct the reviews in an ethical and accountable manner, peer review process should be trust and willing participation, behaves responsibly and ethically for journals, and should provide transparent policies and clear communication among the stakeholders. There's a paper published recently, but I will not go through much of those, but I think it is important to think about limited pool of reviewers and motives and incentives, and so supporting reviewers somehow, and valuing reviewers, and awareness of the evolution of other disciplines like AI will be important. And Scholarly Kitchen published the single most pressing issue for future of peer review, striking a balance human and machines in the future of the peer review and publishing, and ending human-dependent peer review. In here, he suggests 5 cascade steps from human-dependent peer review to human-independent peer review. And also there's an article, although it's preprint, AI beat human at finding problematic images in research papers. With that, I would like to finish in here. If you have any questions, then probably send those questions to email in here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. That was Professor Yoon. He could not make it in person for this webinar, so he had sent us his recording. So apologies if there were any parts of it that were unclear. As mentioned earlier, if you have any questions that you would like addressed based on this particular presentation, please type it into the chat. We will take it at the end of the webinars. With this, I would like to introduce Ms. Liz Allen. She is Director of Strategic Initiatives at F1000 in Taylor, Francis. And this is an initiative that is involved in the fostering and promotion of open access and open research publishing. She is also a board director at CrossWeb and serves on the advisory board of the Software Sustainability Institute. With this, I would like to ask Ms. Liz to go ahead and share with us her presentation of Open Research and Friends Towards Transparent Peer Review. Over to you.
Thank you, Basil. Can I just check that everybody can hear me? Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, very clear.
Clearly so.
Great, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to take part in this webinar, which is a really important topic, and hopefully there'll be time for discussion. Obviously, going last, I have some of the things that I mention in synergy with my previous speakers, which is excellent. So I hope that there's some consistency in our messaging, but I'm going to talk a little bit about a few sort of broader issues around trends in open science and some of the opportunities and challenges that presents for peer review, particularly, and within the context of trends towards more transparency. So this is what I'm going to cover. So firstly, I just wanted to introduce F1000. It's amazingly been mentioned in both previous presentations, so hopefully I can give a bit more flavour to what we do at F1000 and more generally across the Taylor and Francis. But essentially we're a publisher. F1000 is a scholarly publisher. We offer what we call an open research publishing model. It includes the foundation blocks of open access, as has been talked about, but we also support the publication of open data, any research resources associated with the research, and importantly, we offer transparent peer review. So we were born into 2013 in the era of open access. So we're a born open access publisher, but we've been really following trends in open science and the demands that open science presents to publishers and for publishers. So we've been developing and adapting what we offer as a publishing model to synchronize with trends in open science. We're part of the Taylor and Francis group, and we're also a signatory to DORA and committed to making research metrics and all the research we publish committed to being responsible as a publisher. Obviously, there's lots of challenges again, and research integrity issues are burgeoning at the moment. So we are also facing some of those issues, but we're trying really hard to try and make sure that the transparency we offer can help to combat some of those issues. As has been mentioned, we do offer publishing venues. So we have our own owned F1000 venues. So F1000 Research is the first one we started. So it's a publishing, it behaves exactly like a journal. It has its own ISSN. If you publish with us, it counts. It's part of the scholarly record. We're indexed in the normal places, but we do it in a different way. We also run venues. We run our own subject venues. So we have a health venue, a materials venue, and a Routledge social science venue. We also run venues for partners. So we have partnerships with the European Commission, again, has been mentioned. So we run a platform called Open Research Europe, which uses the F1000 model, but it's essentially the European Commission's venue, publishing venue. We also run one for Wellcome, the Gates Foundation, and we have a number of others for other partners. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the goals of open science and what it really means for publishers. So obviously the UNESCO open science guidelines are probably the most famous, the most well used and the most referenced in terms of thinking about what the goals of open science are. And the key things always come down to, you know, equity, sustainability, making sure economic development and technology support research. But one of the key things around open science, and this is where the touch points for publishers are really, really obvious, is trying to make scientific knowledge openly available and accessible and reusable for everyone. So the key thing is discoverability, making sure that the research we publish is discoverable. And there are many global drivers towards making research discoverable that we all face as publishers and the world faces throughout the whole research system. Science policy demands, including things like the UNESCO guidelines. There's also a number of technology and services emerging and around which basically help us to make research that we publish more accessible and discoverable. And then there's lots of benefits that we are now seeing through making research more open and accessible in terms of people's careers, in terms of making the research accessible to the publics that we serve, to influence policy, and to bring some of those benefits that come from open science. So what can publishers do to support open science directly? So this diagram on the left, on the right, is pulled from is all the key things that publishers need to think about if they want to help drive open science practices. Particularly, as I mentioned, the open science knowledge angle, so thinking about making research open access, providing data, all the underpinning information, making sure it's available. But also enabling open dialogue and open engagement around the research we publish, bringing researchers, bringing new audiences to the work that we've published, and making the work discoverable. That is the key thing. Open access, as my previous speakers have both said, is not enough to bring impact and change. It's all about making sure that what we provide is discoverable and usable. So one of the key things that we've been working as a publisher, and I know many of the publishers are doing this too, is working to make sure that there are identifiers and linkages between the research that we publish, that is all the information about where it's funded, who are the authors, what are all the pieces that we connect together, but essentially making sure that the provenance and the trust of that that we can have in the material that we publish is there. And only through providing things like persistent identifiers and provenance markers can we help to do that. And the other angle to help build trust is to make sure that all the pieces that have been involved in the research that we publish are available. And peer review is part of that, and increasingly important in a world where we're facing research integrity issues and some of the issues that my previous speakers talked about. I'm going to briefly go over these because these have been covered, but I also felt it was very important to highlight some of the challenges that we face in peer review can actually be supported by more transparency and bringing more transparency to peer review. So wherever you look in the literature, we still know that having an expert opinion on research is highly valuable. It helps bring trust. There are a number of challenges that we are facing as an industry, both grant funders and publishers, in helping to get expert reviews on the work that is out there. Obviously, first one, large burden on reviewers and editors' time. As mentioned, peer review is somewhat of a black box. How do we select people? How do we know who's responding? We know that response rates to requests for review are dropping because of the burden that people face. And how do we make sure that the review that we get back is a quality decision? How do we know that what's been said is actually important because it's so influential on what is then subsequently published and on people's careers? There's some nice comments here. If we don't have transparency, it's really hard to know where the consensus can be. And I think we need to think very carefully about how we frame peer review going forward to help bring more step forward changes into knowing what we can know about research. As mentioned, it is quite wasteful. It's very wasteful if different publishers are asking the same researchers to review work that perhaps has been rejected in one place, then comes back in another place. There's lots of waste in our system. This is the same for funding agencies, but it's really acute for publishers. The incentive system is getting better, but unless work is transparent and we have ways of incentivizing researchers, the work that peer reviewers do is largely unrecognized. And one thing that I think is really important, again, in the context of open science, as we're publishing more and more different types of research outputs in different ways through the technology that I showed earlier and lots of the technology drives for sharing research, is the way we do peer review today fit for purpose? This is quite an old comment, but it's a really useful comment to look at in this context. That peer review works quite well when we're kind of in a system where we know what we know and we're just making incremental step forwards. But when we're looking at new revolutionary things, new ways of working, new types of research, is it really the right way to get current experts? Can current experts have the expertise to really review research in the ways that we really need it? Do we need to really think how and who is being invited to review that helps make sure we're not censoring out really important work because we're in a space where we're not sure what we're looking at? And then finally, the increasing complexity of research integrity issues. Again, I've used some of the same quotes and papers to show that this is a burgeoning issue. There are lots and lots of issues around research integrity that publishers are facing, grant agencies are facing, research institutions are facing for a whole range of reasons. A lot of them are technology driven. A lot of them are based upon the way that we do research. We're actually opening the door to some of these issues through the processes we operate, including some, as was mentioned, open access challenges and pay to publish models. So there have been many calls for experimentation in peer review. These are some of the things that have been suggested. This is a nice report if you want to read this. It was published by Digital Science back in 2016, projecting what might peer review look like in 2030. They talked about more tailoring of reviews to the people that we invite. Greater diversity, again, has been mentioned. More training and mentorship is really important, that we train our future generations of researchers and all the different types of people that we might ask to do peer review as part of the process. Thinking about publisher agnostic peer review, so sharing reviews that have already been done across publishers. Importantly, the credit and recognition. We need to find better ways to make sure that all the work that researchers do is recognized and is visible. The use of technology to make peer review easier to do. That's one of the biggest challenges we face in changing the way we do peer review, is the systems that we operate to support peer review can be very clunky. They can be very time consuming for authors and reviewers to use. Can we make it simpler for people to comment and make research reviews on work? And transparency is the key one that wasn't actually included in this report back in 2016, but it's obviously a major issue now because of the research integrity issues that have evolved massively over the last few years in particular. I do have a funding background originally. I used to work at Wellcome before I joined F1000 in 2016, and I did some work at that time around grant peer review, and I just wanted to let you know if something you're not familiar with. This is also an issue in grant funding, where there's success rate falling for grant funding. It becomes really, really important to make sure that the peer review process we operate isn't screening out really great grants just because of the process. And there are a number of studies, like we have in publishing peer review, that show that there's actually quite low agreement among grant peer reviewers as well. So we need to be sure that the processes we operate are working to the most effective way. So calls for experimentation in grant peer review, and they're the same researchers that we're asking to review papers. It's the same, much of the same issue. So it's really important to reflect about this in a holistic way. So just to go back to trends towards transparency and the requirements in peer review for publishing, as has been mentioned, there's lots of definitions of peer review, and we're looking at, a number of organisations are looking at creating various taxonomies of peer review, partly because there are a number of different ways that authors can review, and publishers are now offering lots of variety in terms of how articles in their journals among their publishing portfolio can be reviewed. So if you've not come across it yet, the STM are actually in the process of developing a taxonomy for peer review, and these are some of the angles that they're looking at. So how transparent is the reviewer? Who do the reviewers interact with? What information is made available afterwards? And is it throughout the process, or is it only making comments available on publication? PLOS have also got some nice resources, so the Public Library of Sciences, and I've put the links onto the slides as well, and these will get shared, I think. But they've also got some nice sort of overviews, taxonomies of peer review, if people want to look at what the options are available now and what different publishers are using. In terms of open peer review, this again is a bit of an umbrella term. So Tony Ross-Halauer, who both of my previous speakers have mentioned, he's done lots of work looking at definitions of open peer review, how it works, how it doesn't work. And I've included the link there. He did publish a paper in one of F1000's journals, F1000 Research, and this is the link to it here. I think this is the paper that was referenced in the other talks also. But he talks about, we talk about open peer review, and just like peer review itself has lots of different variations, so does open peer review. So there's a bit of an umbrella term. It's used in many different ways. The key three areas where we tend to talk about peer review being open is where or where not the identities are made available, whether the reports are made available, and whether there's other kinds of participation more openly invited in the process. So whether people can comment, those kinds of interactive services. And why would we do open peer review? So again, the evidence is not as prolific as it should be, but it's coming through more and more. But it is good to see more evidence for what the value of open peer review is beyond providing that transparency. So if you provide peer review comments, this provides the ability to look at the research that's being published in more detail. So you can have context and value to the research publication that's being published. F1000 particularly, we've seen lots of people use the fact we make research peer review available. People use that for training. So it's a really nice way for people to actually look at the comments and reflect on good reviews and perhaps less good reviews, but it's a really vital training skill for researchers, as I mentioned. So open peer review really helps. Making reviews available really helps build the next generation, and for publishers to consider the quality and the standard of the reviews that they're receiving. Making research open provides that easy route for credit for the reviewers' work that they've done for peer review. So this incentive, it does help provide an incentive if you have visibility, and reviewers get credit for the work they've provided, which open peer review provides. And ORCID IDs are now coming through on many reviews. All of the F1000, we encourage ORCID IDs for reviews, but many publishers are also looking at that now. And as I mentioned, there's more evidence coming through now, and as the practice increases, that open peer review does actually improve the quality of reviews. Obviously, it has to be implemented properly, and research integrity issues need to be very carefully managed within this process. But there's some examples here of studies that have been done recently to show that open peer review can help the comments be more constructive to authors. Open peer review also shows that often the peer review is quite a black box, has been mentioned. It influences decision about whether something is published or not. But if you provide open peer review, you also see all the comments to all parts of the article. So where there are comments on the methods, you can actually see the nuance of where the comments and where the peer reviewer has focused their comments, which is really helpful, again, for that context and value, as I mentioned in point 1. And there is some evidence about the thoroughness. A lot of reviewers, where reviewers say, I think you should also look at this study, or here's some more evidence that backs up this study or refutes this study, you can see that, and it's all included. So it provides a much richer picture for the feedback for the authors. And as I mentioned, one of the key things that's coming up now, it's really important to help support accountability for those comments and for publishers to have a full accountability of what they've published and support research integrity challenges. And just to show, one of the key things for publishers, obviously, is what do our authors think? Are authors happy to do open peer review? Even if it's not all kinds of open peer review, it might not be all aspects of open peer review, but what do authors think about open peer review? This is a study that was published by Publons, which is part of the Clarivate Group, in 2018, a global state of peer review, and they've done a very rounded study of what attitudes to open peer review. And all kinds of peer review. And the study included over 10,000 reviewers through the Publons database. And you can see here that the questions they asked is, what would the journal's policy on these things make you more or less likely to accept to review? And you can see, making your identity open, providing the reports, providing both, the ability to provide comments, more than half of researchers in all cases say it makes no difference and they would still be willing to accept to review for that author, journal publisher, sorry. And then there was a study published in Nature. Nature also now published peer review reports for some of their journals, as do many other publishers, and through the Publons initiative. But there is definitely more appetite for more open discussion and publishing peer reports, particularly as part of the peer review process. So authors are moving to move towards this. There is definitely more interest in it. And as open science drives continue and countries push towards more open and collaborative ways of working, I suspect this is only going to increase. And there are a number of initiatives emerging that really do support open peer review. So again, as mentioned, there are initiatives that tying peer review in the final journal and the comments presented in the final journal to the preprints that were published, and initiatives like Review Commons, which provide journal independent peer review, so comments can be shared and used again. Web of Science are now including peer reviews in the scholarly record of the articles they publish on Web of Science if they've been included. So if peer review has been open on a journal in an article, it can be included in the scholarly record on Web of Science now. Open peer review has become a core component of any kind of open science training, and FOSTA are an organisation running from the European Commission. They provide all trainings around open science. It's really useful to see if you have a look at the website, the link is there. They provide a range of courses around open science related initiatives, around open sharing your data, open access, basic open access, but they have an open peer review component now. And in terms of credit, Clarivate are also, if they've evolved Publons into researcher recognition program, and you can now get credit for the research reviews that you've provided, providing that that journal allows you to do that. So before I finish, I just wanted to give a little bit more flavour to F1000, just because it's been mentioned a lot. This is what we do at F1000. So we say we provide open, post-publication, transparent peer review. So we are really at the extreme end of open peer review. And as I mentioned, we do this because we're all about supporting the aims and aspirations of open science and research integrity issues. So this is how our model works on all the venues that we offer. So an article will be submitted to F1000. We do a series of checks behind the scenes. So we do lots of checks we do ethical checks, plagiarism checks, open data checks. We check that any underpinning data that's being shared is available. And we do those checks first to check the provenance of the article, as I mentioned, to check that all the pieces are there for someone to be able to use that research before we publish and peer review. If those pieces aren't there, we reject. Once the pieces are there and we've checked the provenance of the data and all the pieces and the author's credentials and the validation checks, other checks we provide, we will publish that article and then we will do the peer review. But the peer review is done entirely in the open. So we have open identities, comments are published alongside the article, and then authors are invited to review their article based upon those comments. So it's iterative in real time. And the new versions are published, which are linked to the old version and linked through the Crossref DOI record. The default is always the new version that is available everywhere. And that's available on F1000's publishing venues. And then once it's passed peer review, and we have thresholds to adjudicate whether something has passed peer review, it has to receive approvals from a certain number of reviewers. We will then send that article to the indexers. So it will suddenly become much more discoverable. So it will be sent to Scopus and the other indexers that we work with. And this is kind of how it looks. We have an article here on the right. An article comes to us. You can see this is version 2. When the reviews came through, the authors presented another version. We have inclusion of the description of the versions and what's changed on the article. At every stage of the process, you can see who's reviewing, what they've said. You can click through to any of these comments. So on this version 1 article, there were 2 reviewers, these 2 reviewers here, 1, 2. If you click the read button, you will see their comments directly. And you can see we have ORCID IDs for these reviewers. And when another version came through, that the authors responded to version 1, another version came through, and the reviewers also checked it again quickly. And this is an article that is indexed in Scopus. It's passed peer review. So just to summarize, this is what we have. We have open identities. So reviewers provide names and affiliations published alongside the article. Full conflicts of interest declared just like any traditional publisher. We capture ORCID IDs. The reports are published alongside the article. We encourage co-reviewing and encourage early career researchers to get involved. All reviews have DOIs and they're citable. And then the reviewers, they provide a narrative just like they do in a traditional publisher, and they say whether the article, in their view, is suitable to be approved. So I hope that provides you enough information on F1000. I'm really happy to discuss that and happy to follow up with anybody at the end. But I just wanted to give a quick summary to what I've covered today. So discoverability and access to all the components of research are really integral to open science, and they're only going to become more so. But in that context, could we think that peer review has some aspects of it that's ripe for reinvention, especially in the context of what open science needs to help it succeed? Again, peer review is part of the scholarly record. How can we make reviews work best for science? How can we make sure that they're available, don't necessarily cloud the space of the article that we've published, but they're accessible, they help provide the context that people need when they need it? And really importantly, the burgeoning research integrity issues really do support the case for transparency throughout the publishing process, which all feeds into the aims of open science to support the benefits that can bring to all of us. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I hope that was useful. And I think the slides will be available as well later. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alan. That was a great presentation. And I guess as science, the way science is published changes, it is but natural to expect that peer review as a process evolves. And I think open science, in a way, demands that the speed at which research has been published. So yeah. So I think thank you all speakers for your great presentations. What we do right now is take questions. And I've got one question. I'll put it to the panel of speakers. It was from Himanshu. How can we assure that articles published on preprint servers are peer-reviewed? He has done several articles to authenticate and found similarity checks as high as 90%. So how can we ensure that this article that was published on a preprint server has actually been peer-reviewed and there's actually no plagiarism? Anyone is open to take that question?
I will answer shortly. There is very important and good question, but very difficult question. I think your question is two. First one is how can we know the preprint peer reviewed? So the first answer is peer reviewed preprint usually makes their review report publicly available. So we can know about the peer reviewed preprint. The second one is about plagiarism checking. Plagiarism checking is one of the biggest problems with the preprints, I think. So when using a plagiarism program, you need to check what the duplicates are 4 rather than just looking at the duplication rate. Is my answer.
Yeah,
Thank-
just let me add to that. Obviously, preprint servers, they traditionally have been set up to not have a peer review service, right? They're not journals that preprints are places to post early versions. People have evolved how they use preprint servers, of course, but they weren't set up to have a peer review service associated with them. Having said that, some initiatives like the one I showed that ASAP Bio are doing, where they are trying to tie when an article is published on a preprint server and then is subsequently published in a journal, if the authors elect to and the journal allows them, they can share the reviews that were done on the final article on the preprint server alongside it. So you can see this preprint eventually got reviewed. Whether it's exactly the same copy as the final version, I'm not sure of the detail there, but some preprint servers are now looking at how they can port the reviews that were done of the final article to the preprint so that they can tie them together. I do think some preprint servers do basic plagiarism checks. I think that might be coming, but I totally agree with Dr. Seo. I think the plagiarism issue is the fact that there will be very close plagiarism between something that's published. Well, it's not plagiarism, it's the same article. It's not, no wonder it picks it up. If the article's published on a preprint server and then it's published in a journal, you will find a match. So it's a case of looking at your algorithms for the plagiarism that you receive at the journal and checking that. I think Crossref are also looking at this through the Authenticate tool, but I suspect that might be something to look at what Crossref's advice is on that. But it is a tricky thing that we're all facing. If something's been published as a preprint first and then published in a journal, there will be a match naturally, and that one's, it's not plagiarism if it's the same thing or something very similar.
Thank you, Dr. So. Thank you, Dr. Aaron. I've got another question, but before I ask that question, one question from my side too. Peer review as a process has always been difficult for journal editors to manage, and with open peer review, have you found that the peer review as a process, is it a longer process? Is it a shorter process? Any learnings over there? Sorry, this was to Dr. Aaron. Like in your experience with F1000, did you find that the open peer review process, was it shorter or longer? Any learnings versus the traditional peer review process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So because we do versioning, the timings that we have for the process aren't very easily comparable to other publishers. Also, a lot of publishers don't make the times that it takes to review available either. So the baseline and the comparisons are hard to make. I do think, being honest, we do find recruiting reviewers increasingly challenging, like every other publisher is finding. But in our process, at least, we've made the work available on the site while we're doing the peer review. So we haven't held the authors and delayed the authors up, because we have done a load of screen checks first, but the peer review is coming later. So yeah, I don't think we have great comparisons. I don't think it's any slower from what we've seen of other data, but we are increasingly facing, which is one of the challenges that we all raised today, in securing reviewers. And some people still are reluctant to review in the open. So we also have that issue with the way that we do open is open identities and everything's open. There is still some reluctance in some places, some disciplines to that, but we're seeing less of that. But we are seeing the challenge of recruiting reviewers.
Great. Thank you very much. There's another question from Mr. Barry Clark. Any comments on regional differences on the acceptance of open research and, in particular, open review, peer review? So maybe I think this is more addressed. I think Dr. So will be best placed to answer this question. Like, if you could comment a bit about on the acceptance of open peer review as a process, and how does it compare versus the West?
Actually, it depends on the countries and the culture of research of the country, especially in Asian country. Many researchers don't like open their identity. Some people accept the open of review report, but many people, many researchers don't ready to accept the open peer review till now. But these days, as you, Richard mentioned, UNESCO adopted open science recommendation 2022, and the United States White House also accepted similar policy. So many countries will proceed the policy of open science. So in the future, the open peer review may be spread over the world. That's all.
Thank you,
Ju-
Dr.
ju-
So. Yeah,
just
go
just
ahead.
I just want to add to that. I mean, think that's very true. There are definitely cultural differences in acceptance, particularly the open identities, like Dr. So has mentioned. We do see open identities as that one area that a lot of publishers aren't going as far as F1000 has gone because of reluctance around open identities. There are cultural differences, and by that we mean country differences as well, but actually there is research culture issues as well. So a lot of people don't like to make their identity available because they're worried about a senior colleague and how a more junior colleague might behave. So I think cultural differences can kind of cover a lot of things. I think the studies and the evidence that I showed as well, they all show adoption of and improvements from open peer review, but the one reservation, most of the studies, is still there's not a great acceptance of open identities across the board yet. So that is the one area that perhaps is a step too far for many places and research disciplines and groups at the moment. But it doesn't mean it's something that we can't do in the future. But yeah, and it doesn't mean you can't do the other aspects of open, of course. You don't have to do everything. It's transparency can be in steps and suit whatever context works best.
I think in the West, the open peer review system with open science has been talked about for quite some time, and I've just only recently started seeing conversations on open peer review in some of the East Asian forums. So hopefully it picks up, and it just democratizes science publication. So yeah. So I think that was the last of the questions. I think what most people have asked is if the content of this webinar will be published and shared. So yes, it will be. And everyone, all the participants will be notified once it's shared. And I think with that, I think that was the last of the questions. Any more questions from anyone? Okay. Okay. So no more questions. So with that, I will conclude the session. I think it's right on time. And I would like to thank all the participants. I would like to thank Professor So. I would like to thank Dr. Allen and Professor Yoon for their contribution to this webinar. Going forward, please feel free to suggest any topics that you would like to see addressed in the next webinar. It was great having all of you here, and thank you all.